I'm Chris McDonough, a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Welcome to the interview room, everybody. It's time to take a seat. Thank you so much for being with us. What a show we have planned for you tonight. As always, coming to you from an undisclosed location. At TIR, we follow the evidence wherever it takes us on a case, and all opinions are welcomed here. We only ask one thing, that you keep them classy, honest, and safe. Thank you always to our mods and our subscribers and all those who support this family here at the interview room. Tonight, we've assembled an incredible panel of experts for the program. We're going to talk about criminal minds in the Metaverse and how that's going to impact future generations. On panel tonight, Greg Cooper. While assigned to the FBI Academy and Critical Incident Response Group, he served in several national positions within the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. He was the manager of the Violent Crime Apprehension Program, known as VICAP, and he also became the acting unit chief of the Behavioral Profile Unit of the FBI National Academy Instructor and Criminal Psychology, Criminal Investigative Analysis, and Analytical Aspects of Criminal Behavior. He is the founder and executive director of the Case Foundation. Next to him tonight will be Dean Jackson, the deputy executive of CCF, who's worked more than 30 years of experience in law enforcement and cold case homicide investigations. He's a violent crime specialist and continues to provide training for law enforcement agencies in homicide, missing persons, unidentified bodies, sexual assaults, cold case investigations, and stress management and death notifications. And tonight we have three forensic psychological experts. First and foremost, a legend, Dr. Ann Burgess. She's a professor of psychiatry, mental health, nursing at Boston College, Cornell School of Nursing, and she's a professor emerita from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Burgess received her bachelor's of doctorate degree from Boston University and her master's degree from the University of Maryland. She teaches 5 forensic courses: victimology, forensic mental health, forensic sciences, forensic science lab, and wounded warriors in transition. She co-founded one of the first hospital-based crisis intervention programs for sexual assault victims at Boston City Hospital. Love Boston. She's a licensed and advanced practical nurse in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, and she also maintains prescriptive authority there. She's testified as an expert in thousands of cases. And her work at the Behavior Science Unit and the FBI Academy is featured in the Netflix series Mindhunter. Next up, another legend, Dr. Gary Brucato. He earned his PhD at the New York School for Social Research in New York City and is a clinical psychologist, researcher, and author in the areas of psychotic illness and violence. He has over 2 decades of clinical experience, having trained at Creedmoor Psychiatric Hospital, Beth Israel Medical Center, Bronx Lebanon Hospital Center, Long Island Jewish Zucker Hillside Hospital Center, and Mount Sinai Services, Elmhurst Medical Health Center and Hospital, including work on the Rikers Island. He's also included his work on Rikers Island Female Prisoner Unit at the EHC. He was also trained as a private forensic practice, learning to conduct evaluations for civil and criminal courts, and was employed at Zucker Hillside Recognition and Prevention Program for Early Psychosis from 2008 to 2012. And third on our list, Dr. Lawrence Simon. His insights and cutting-edge research into the mind of dangerous criminals is engaging and critical in the component of major criminal investigations. Dr. Simon has delivered his innovative presentations before national and international audiences that include nearly every branch of government within law enforcement, social services, and medical and forensic professionals. Before traveling the country full-time as a highly respected LE trainer, law enforcement trainer, he spent over a decade employed in challenging forensic settings, interviewing and managing crisis facilitation, violent sexual crime groups, treating and assessing some of the most violent and dangerous men in the country, including those on many death rows. All three of these doctors are legends in their field. All three of them. And our legal expert tonight is my good friend and also a legend in the legal field, former administrative law judge, Mr. Billy L. Little. He's a national recognized capital attorney, having handled 17 capital murder cases. He served his country in the United States military for over 24 years, retiring as a colonel, and he's a decorated war veteran. He was responsible for overseeing the representation of death penalty cases at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Mr. Little was a founding member of the Arizona State Bar's Military Legal Assistance Committee. This committee works to find solutions for unique legal problems facing active duty and military members. In addition to his work with this committee, Mr. Little has been active in establishing veterans courts in the state of Arizona. These courts separate veterans from the general populations of offenders and seek to provide treatment to veterans in an effort to reduce recidivism and improve the quality of life for them as individuals. He serves on the Judicial Appointment Committee for the Salt River Pima Indian Community. And that's always cool because we're working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs here at the Case Foundation. And while serving as a member of the Maricopa County Bar Criminal Law Committee, he co-authored and published the handbook for the Arizona Criminal Law Practitioner. With this, as you can tell, folks, you're in for a very special evening. I want to welcome each and every one of our panel members tonight to the interview room. Welcome.
Hi, Chris. Good to be with you.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, I see Dean snuck up there, Doc, so I'm going to move. I'm going to move him over here. And I see what he did, too. The lawyer tried to take the other spot pretty quickly, you know, and I'm going to put Dean over here. Welcome to each and every one of you. We are so grateful to have each of you here. What an evening we're going to have and what a discussion. I cannot wait. I feel like that student from the first day of school, you know, that's just sitting here, but here we get, you know, a panel of 6 professors versus just one. And we're really excited for that. So tonight, kind of laying down some of the ground rules here for us, we're going to hopefully just have an open discussion about sharing what is the metaverse. And for folks who are unfamiliar with that, I just want to read a definition of what this is and then show a really quick 5-slide presentation here to kind of kick off our discussion. So according to Merriam-Webster, and for those of the youngsters out there, that's a dictionary. It's not Google. And a metaverse is an immersive 3-dimensional virtual world where people interact as avatars with each other and with software agents, using the metaphor of the real world, but without its physical limitations. So obviously, the first question that always comes up is, what in the heck does that mean? And it kind of led into why this panel is assembled here tonight, because Greg, Dean, and myself were kind of chit-chatting about, where is this going to go, and how in the world are we going to be able, to deal with this, not only from a psychological aspect, but how are the offenders going to take this to the next level? And so you're each here in your expertise from, your professions, your professional careers, to kind of guide us into what you think is going to be on the horizon. And so with that, I'll just kind of open up for an initial thought process on what your initial take is. And we'll just start up in the, what is it, like Hollywood Squares, right? Doc Lawrence, Simon, we'll start with you. Just kind of weigh in for a sec of what your initial thoughts are. And then I'm going to show the PowerPoint when we go around the panel here.
Yeah. Well, it gives excuse the background noise there, but it gives by going in there and doing whatever it is that you're doing in there, it gives that anonymity, and being anonymous in there. It's kind of almost like the first thing I thought of is the Stanford experiment, the prison experiment, where they did in the basement, where they basically flipped the coin. 50% of the students, they became officers, and 50% had become the inmate. And what they did is that they they had to terminate the experiment because it certainly got out of hand. But one of the things that was mentioned is that the sunglasses, a couple of the officers wore the sunglasses because that kind of gives that, that being anonymous. So when I think of strapping on the helmet or whatever it is that they're doing in there, and it gives that sort of impression. So essentially, they're doing whatever they're engaging in, the behavior they're engaging in, but they're doing it in an anonymous way. Wants to take after
Awesome.
that?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dr. Burgess, what do you say?
Well, what I'd like to say is that this was introduced to me back in the 90s when Aaron Walsh, who is one of the founders of the software in which this is done at Boston College, began to do immersive education. Now, this is different, of course, than what we're going to talk about tonight, but it gives you some basis for how early this had started. And in the immersive education is where everything would be focused on that. And I just want to quote what he said back then. He said, the best thing about today's technology, now this is back in the 90s, is its ability to connect, heal, and protect people. But then he said, the worst thing about today's technology is its tendency to be misused. The dark, unregulated side of the internet that teems with unsavory and dangerous characters is a prime example. And I think that's what's important. What we're going to be talking about today is what are some of those possible predictors of the dangerous aspect of that. So he gave us a lot of technology. He does a lot of that. He still teaches at Boston College, and so that and has conferences all around the world. But it's really global at this point from the immersive education.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Brucato, thoughts?
In 2019, I co-authored a book with Michael H. Stone called The New Evil. And in that book, we proposed a concept of new evil, which is the idea that it's kind of interesting to think about crime and how it interacts with technology and with the kind of growing audaciousness and kind of cruelty and narcissism of people as culture progresses. And for example, as soon as the microwave was invented, China Arnold used it to kill an infant. Right. As soon as a technology appears, you can imagine someone using it in a pornographic manner and using it in a violent manner. And so this new technology, in the sense, is no different than any other technology that's come along and been perverted in that manner. We can have a very long conversation about all the wonderful attributes of a multiverse and all the negative ones. Now, those of us who have worked with violent offenders, particularly the sexually perverse form of violent offender, whether it be serial or one time in nature, so forth, we know that these are intensely visual and fantasy-oriented individuals. And we know that they are people who, in a sense, have long had the habit of creating avatars or alternative senses of themselves and kind of going out in the world and trying to project that into reality by committing these offenses. And so I think that it's going to be fascinating to think about, what happens when that, in a sense, more literally happens, where you have this palette that you can paint any sense of yourself and do anything you'd like to someone without really feeling that it's happening in the real world. So my sense is, is that it's a new evil.
Interesting. Greg, what do you think? Thank you.
Just to kind of dovetail into that, I think from my experience, the effects, this allows an individual to dramatize, if you will, and further sensitize, particularly not just visually, but even tactilely, particularly if these individuals have the ability to, say, place these suits on where they can actually be stimulated, certain portions of their body. So it really accentuates that experience of the fantasy. We talk about how fantasy, in most of these cases, particularly serial offenders, most of these cases, fantasy drives that behavior. All behavior is purposeful, as Dr. Simon likes to put it. And when one begins to fantasize about committing crimes, even at the lower stages, eventually, typically what happens is the fantasy is not sufficient. They have to actually go out and experience it. And now with this capability, they can actually experience it, certainly visually, much more dramatically and sensationally. And then if they can even extend that to tactilely through their touch and the stimulation of both body parts and organs, you can imagine the level of sophistication that can develop with these individuals before they ever go out and commit a real crime. Crime is being committed in the metaverse in a sense, and that's a whole nother discussion. But to actually a human being, how much more sophisticated can they get? Which creates even more problems for the investigators who have to deal with that. We know that the application of fantasy, if you will, is from a legitimate perspective is very effective. Athletes do it. They fantasize and practice mentally and experience levels of success, increase their abilities and their performances as a result of that. In the military, you've got sophisticated weaponry that is practiced by the practitioners. You also have pilots, the simulation of piloting an airplane before they ever get out there in the real experience. So when you bring this down to criminal activity, to me, it's very disturbing, very alarming as to what the potential is going to be.
Okay, I'm going to jump over to Dean real fast, and then Billy, you'll have the legal word at towards the end here. So, Dean, real fast, what are your thoughts?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what everybody's saying, and I think kind of even going back further, if we look at the Gutenberg press and the motive and reason for that coming into being, was the publication of the Bible over a long period of time. And we see as that came into play, then all of these other things begin to follow and fall into place. I know, Chris, we've had conversations about the impact that we saw and around the world with pornography going onto the internet and the accessibility. And I think it ties into anonymity. I think it ties into the concept that we can develop fantasies. I know in one of the books looking at Dennis Rader, that early on in his fantasy life, he was actually drawing things and then finding photographs of women's faces and putting those onto his drawings and part of his fantasy life. So if we kind of think about it as how these people can evolve to a certain level, using what would be in today's standards, pretty simplistic methodologies. And now we've got something that is unbelievably powerful. Anonymity seems to be obviously a huge piece, but I think the scariest part is to think in terms of where this could potentially lead to. And as I've kind of thought about, and I think as we talked about this, even looking at having this discussion as a group, was, a lot of times we see these perpetrators, their first time that they actually go out and try things, they haven't really worked out all the bugs. They realize they made a mistake. So they've got to go back to the drawing board and make adjustments and do all that. But if you've got somebody who can, in the metaverse, work out all of the issues and kinks and the fear factors, because it brings them into that real life engaged kind of reality. I think the scary part is to think about if they ever do leave the metaverse and bring this back to the physical world, what is that going to look like?
Very interesting. Billy, what say you in terms of how do you think the court systems are going to wrap their minds around some of the things coming?
Legal system is always the last people to take action. So we're probably at least 10, 15 years away from any sort of criminal law that can address this. There is and it's trying to address this is fraught with all kinds of constitutional challenges. So for the first time in the United States, animated child pornography was made illegal in 2003 by the Protect Act. Now, in most countries in the world, it's still legal to possess child pornography if it's a cartoon. There are some countries that have made it illegal, but especially with our Constitution and the freedoms that we all appreciate, there are already constitutional challenges to that law, something that I think we can all agree on, and there's no actual victim. There's no child out there who's actually been harmed. And even addressing that problem has a lot of legal challenges, and they're still challenging it. So Protect Act of 2003, if the people who are watching haven't read it, it's interesting and probably the original way to start dealing with these problems from the criminal side. So I'm not the expert here on any of the stuff that these other people are talking about, the behavioral side and the impact on people. But if you want to know about how you can address it criminally through the legal system, civilly, it's fairly straightforward. You can sue anybody for that today, right? But criminally, you can't prosecute them for it. So I will answer any questions. Other than that, I'm going to leave it to this panel of experts that you've got. So if a legal question comes up, tap me on the head and say, "Hey,
That's what we love about you. Always need you in the. Go ahead.
Dr. Burgess can tap me on the head, and she's right above me.
Hollywood Squares, right?
Yeah.
Okay, which leads us into the next piece of this. So I put together just a real short PowerPoint slide here, real fast, just to kind of show everybody, where this is headed currently right now in augmented reality. And their acronym for it is AR and VR, virtual reality and augmented reality. Right now, currently, the market size is about $296 billion. And for those of you who are not familiar with what this is these goggles, and then it's you're actually immersed into a virtual reality. And the growth projections are about 18% per year, which leads into the popularity increase from 2020 has already increased nearly 5 times, or 19% growth rate, which is an increased demand of about 14.94 million units being sold across just the United States, by the way. Usage in the United States, VR is coming into a $52.1 million usage, or excuse me, 52.1 million people utilizing it, i.e. they've seen it and now they've tried it. And then the future predictions by 2030 is there are going to be over 23 million jobs in the AR, VR realm. So that sector will grow unbelievably fast. And then the gaming industry is projected by 2027 to forecast $92.31 billion into this marketplace. So the sectors that are driving this growth are gaming and entertainment currently. But there's also two countries investing. Primarily, China has about $5.8 billion invested. And of course, the technology sectors in the United States, about $5.1 billion. So China's investment for their side of the world is much higher than ours. And the major players are obviously the major corporations: Microsoft, HTC, Oculus, et cetera, Samsung, Sony. So this is a big thing. 47% male, approximately 23% female, and they're coming from all sectors of society. And they're weighing in a very real way, which opens up virtual crime examples, and why I think your opinions here this evening for, families and their children and women and folks who have children are critical. So death threats and assaults are a possibility. Money laundering can be a possibility, and we'll talk about what I mean by that. Intellectual property theft, child abuse, fraud and cyber crime, cyber stalking, and what they call grifting, which is you show up, you create a fake, sock account, and then you just, troll the heck out of somebody and cyber stalk them with various fake accounts. And then, of course, the oldest profession in the world, and then virtual SA, sexual assault. So that said, where should we begin this conversation in terms of, I'll start with Dr. Burgess. Where has, in your research, where do you think the offenders will take advantage of this world coming?
Well, I think they'll take advantage of trying to get access to victims. I mean, I work with victims primarily, and I've been trying to see in my own caseload of how they are able to lure young people. I have a case right now, she's 14, and somehow got lured onto this website that for dancing. She loves to dance. And so they said, oh, just dance. And then, of course, the next thing is we'll start to take off her clothes. And she didn't realize it until, luckily, there was a undercover, maybe it was out of the National Center Missing Exploited Children or whatever, but somebody had got onto that and they were able to get the offender. So that was a fairly quick, but all of the photos that she had, the dancing and everything is already on the internet. So what does this mean if you're going to go to the metaverse? And I just wanted to say this today in the mail. This is my husband is a engineer, and look at what it says. It's a whole program devoted to enterprise metaverse. Wow! And I mean, it was just so timely that this came across. So it's going to be, it's certainly out there. I certainly echo what Chris has done. So to answer your question, Chris, I'm concerned about how do we educate and warn potential victims to this? How will they be used in it? And can they be, to get to a legal issue, can they if they feel that they've been assaulted through one of these indirectly, one of these avatar type situations, is that going to be a possible criminal matter? I think that's where some of this is going to go. And certainly the virtual pornography, they're going to extend that and get into, I'm sure, some of that behavior.
Very interesting. Dr. Brucato, what say you?
Well, whenever we look at how a technology develops into something, where that's far more dangerous in terms of crime and potential for it, anonymity, which has come up already, is very critical. An excellent example of this is photography. Photography was developed in the 1830s, but it wasn't until Polaroids and the capacity for this kind of not needing someone to develop the photos for you in a store or something figured into it that you start to see offenders using the camera in that perverse way, so that immediately upon the wide availability of cheap of inexpensive cameras like Polaroids in the late 1950s, you start to see people like Harvey Glotman, the serial killer who lured women, pretended to be a photographer for magazines, and then engaged in violent sexual assault. So I think anonymity is very key. And the other thing I think we have to really think about is the idea that, the human brain has a way of operating, probably because of dopamine, the chemical dopamine, where it sort of needs a greater and greater fix. And I think that what we have to think about is the idea that if you titillate the brain, if you give it little peaks of dopamine from a certain experience, it needs something realer and bigger and more intense to fulfill that need. And so the worry, I think, from a psychological perspective, although the jury is out in terms of actual research on the metaverse per se, I think the real alarm would be that what starts out as fantasy rapidly is not enough. And then has to spill over into more and more intensive behavior. And so that we worry that people who are sexually gratified might have to spill over into real life. Although, as I say, I think the research on the metaverse itself is pending.
Interesting.
Can I ask you a question, Doctor?
Of course.
Does there need to be a predisposition towards this type of behavior, or can it be created by this metaverse as VR?
Well, I think this is a great question, and it's one that also comes up a lot with violent video games and other forms of entertainment. What I think is a little complicated about it is that there are millions of people who use violent video games and probably will use the metaverse who wouldn't have that risk, supposedly wouldn't have that risk. But my guess is that an individual with a certain background, with certain feelings of inferiority and the need for domination and control over others, who's having those kinds of fantasies, mixed with, let's say certain aberrant personality features like being a little psychopathic or a little sadistic or a little narcissistic, a little sexually perverse. I think you may see something of a toxic soup there because of the freedoms that are permitted in this fantasy world. But my guess is that the average individual would not be at such enormous risk. Unfortunately, the people who would be could constitute quite a serious matter. But I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on that.
Interesting. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Just one of the concerns I have too is to add on to that, is we know that, for example, one of the most common themes among serial offenders, including sexual assault and or homicide, is pornography, and particularly violent pornography and sadistic types of pornography. So imagine now dramatizing this in a very virtual way where these individuals can experience it virtually before ever going out to affect it. Now, though some of those have a proclivity to move down that direction, but it may have taken them days to weeks to months to years to ever get there, one step at a time. But now you take an individual who normally, because of their value system or other inhibitions that may have prevented them from even thinking about doing something like that, they get introduced to it, to experiment with it now virtually. And it opens up a world, to me, anyway, in my opinion, it opens up a world of potential offenders that may have never offended before against a human being. And we do know that many individuals are satisfied sufficiently with the fantasy alone. But now that they can act it out, or now that they can experiment it, that's not a crime. They can experiment it in the metaverse. That's no crime. But now they go out and experience it, experience a crime, experience all those chemical reactions that they seem to enjoy and are heightened by. And now, of course, the next step is a real person, just like the fantasy is affected. But one of the points I'm trying to make here is that it creates a forum for individuals who may never have committed a crime to experiment with it and move into that opportunity.
Interesting. We'll come to you in a second, Dean. Let's go to Doc Simon. What say you? Weigh in, and then we'll go to Dean.
Yeah, no, the possibilities, I mean, are endless, and they're frightening. Look, it gives more exposure to deviance. And I can't remember the doctor's name, but I brought up a good point. I think it was Dr. Dobson, I believe, that interviewed Ted Bundy. And one of the things that he pointed out was, if you look at back in the day, you didn't really pick. You could turn the channel. Maybe you had 3 or 4 channels on what you can watch. But today, you could get whatever you want. So the possibilities are limitless. And when you talk about pornography, it just adds that extra dimension of exposure. So he brought up the movie E.T., the extraterrestrial. And do you remember what the extraterrestrial was given by Elliot? And it was, those of you who haven't seen E.T., hate to play spoiler, but it was Reese's Pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was a 15-second clip. And Reese's Pieces was the #1 selling candy in the entire world at that time.
Wow.
So when you look at, again, something such as this, that, it's frightening. Go back to what Dean, talked about rehearsal, honing your craft. So you have the ability to do that. And it's very difficult. It's as far as taking that and committing and engaging in criminality, going back what the doctor was also talking about, that it's you don't know who the individual is or what's going on in their life that could put them over the edge. And Greg, you were mentioning that you just don't know. You don't know what's going on in that individual's life and where they're at. And usually when you talk with, when you talk to folks that have done bad things, there's usually some sort of stressful event that pushes them over the edge to engage, to make that decision to engage in that criminality. So we don't know where they're at the time when they engage with regards to the metaverse, where they're at the time. We don't know where they're going. We don't know what's going to happen during their engagement in the meta universe. So there's a lot of things that could change, but you can have those proclivities. And Greg mentioning, the history of the fantasies in play well before. But most people, as again, I was listening to, most people that are playing these violent video games don't go on to commit these awful crimes. But there's individuals that do, that this could make a certain type of individual who has some of the propensities that the doctor was talking about before that could sort of push them over the edge, that makes them more of a candidate, let's say, than someone else. And of course, taking in the factor of stressful events that do, again, there's that sort of that decision, if you will. They have a lot going on in their lives, and how is this meta universe going to impact these decisions, if you will?
Interesting. Dean, what say you?
Well, I think, we keep talking about the fact that there's a lot of pornography out there, and a lot of people are utilizing it, but don't become, either serial killers or, serial sexual assault individuals, which is true. But I guess my question for everybody is, in your experience, how often do you run across somebody who does do a sexual assault or sexual homicide that they have had nothing ever to do with pornography? So I think there's an aspect of this. It seems to always be there at the table. We can look at it from one side and say, well, tons of people are exposed to it. But the other side of it is that I don't think, at least what we're seeing at the foundation, when we get into sexual assaults and sexual homicides, it's part and parcel of that. And to me, that brings up this second word. We've talked about anonymity, but to me, there's another word, and that's familiarity. And I think what the metaverse enables, and this is both on the offender and the victim side, is it enables people to develop a level of familiarity that is not always based, oftentimes not even based in reality, but exposes them to a high risk. We know that an offender will, for example, utilize that building relationship. So we've seen, let's say, for example, a real estate agent who is the target of an offender will be asked to take that person to multiple properties till they develop, quote, this familiarity and a comfort level. And then all of a sudden they want to take them to this other place. So I think what you're seeing is people becoming very familiar with maybe something that's deviant, which then lessens their built-in kind of checks and balances to that. But then you also see on the victim side, they're out there, and this is somebody they believe they've been engaging with. They know this person. They really don't, because this person has a nefarious or a deviant aspect to them of what they're doing. But all of their guards go completely down, because this is somebody I've been hanging out with in the metaverse for years. Sure, I'll go meet you somewhere. Sure, I'll do something with you. So I think that to me is also another aspect that really makes this really scary.
Interesting. Dr. Burgess, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to add on to what Dina just said, is how many of those of us that work with either victims or offenders are asking if the person is engaged in the metaverse. I mean, that's something we need to really add to our questions, because we routinely do it on social media. What are you watching, what are the platforms, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to start now that after this, really see what people are doing in their activities. So that's what I recommend to both victims and for anyone that even my students, I might even ask them how many are using that. The other thing I would say is, where are they getting the content for these scenarios? And we should, I think that's, from a research standpoint, would be interesting to find out. I looked at some literature, some of the research literature, and there's starting to be some interesting articles there. And one was on content and how that content is built. And they had some real warnings that I think some of you have already mentioned some of those, but being too engaged in this can affect their own relationships, because they aren't able, they get the high from what is on the virtual, but not in the real relationship. So some of those factors are already coming into the literature.
Interesting. Billy, did you want to say something? I saw your mic come on.
I just had a follow-up question. I have more questions than answers.
Yeah, keep asking.
So if you all, when you're doing your risk assessment for these sex assault offenders, SA offenders, when you do the risk assessment, is this something that you would see as an important addition to that, or do you guys already ask this when you do your assessment?
When I think that's what Dr. Burgess was just
Yeah.
talking about adding it to the list, to your point. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that people are. I think that's, maybe Gary would know if that's being part of any assessment. Do you know, Gary?
Well, when I'm inquiring about the person's particular interests and sex and so forth, we do talk about any form of pornography, but we really, I do ask about the content of the pornography, because what is more concerning is not garden variety pornography, but pornography of a violent nature, bondage pornography, things like that. And again, there are many people who engage in these things that we don't see go on to commit violent offenses, but we do see people that where there can be a spillover. Even more disturbing, and we saw this with the introduction of the internet, there are also people on the other side of the sadomasochistic coin who desire to be wounded or injured by other people. And there have been horrendous cases of individuals who get together with an offender with a wish or a desire to be killed, tortured, so forth. For example, the infamous case of the German cannibal Armin Meiwes, who was able to find on the internet a male victim who desired to be killed, to be cannibalized and killed. And the entire thing was filmed. I mean, they actually engaged in sharing a piece of the victim's body in a kind of eating ritual before the victim was killed and cannibalized over many weeks. So that you also have to worry about individuals that have a fantasy of being harmed, a fantasy of being injured, and so forth. And what worries me about the metaverse is the idea that a person feels that he or she can play out either sadistic or masochistic fantasies without really worrying that it's going to spill over into real life. And that's where I think you start treading a very, very dangerous line, because eventually, as those of us who've worked with offenders know, the spillover is a very real thing. But I think the emphasis has to be on like violent pornographic content. I'd love to hear other people's contents there, but I'll just point out that I once interviewed an offender who told me that as a little boy, he had been wandering around in the neighborhood in an alley and found that in a garbage pail, somebody had thrown out two magazines. One of them was a kind of a Playboy magazine, and the other one was a kind of a, I guess I'd say, like a detective magazine, like one of these magazines where a knife is being held to a woman's throat, and it's a sort of true crime magazine and so forth. And he said that picking between them, he found the second one to be far more arousing. And I think, which just wouldn't surprise, I think, a lot of people that are here on the panel. So that I think there's a special emphasis on that type of sexual titillation that I think we have to pay attention to in interviews like Ann is talking about. Wouldn't you say, Ann?
Yeah, I would just say Bob Ressler, one of his famous interviews of a serial killer, brought in about a dozen detective magazines. And what he did is he went through with the person he was interviewing, who was a serial killer, just to ask him specifically what part of the cover, he showed him all these covers, was particularly of interest to him. And it was all the bondage. And he was able to, it was almost like a Rorschach, that he was able to find out all this information about his, and it was just Detective Magazine. So you didn't have to have I think somebody else made that point. It doesn't have to be pornography. It can be anything that, and in this case, he had started on this early, around 7 or 8, when he was able to get the magazines. So keep that in mind, that you can get a lot of information from some of the other types of activities they engage in.
Which leads me into a thought process here, that is there what are some of the red flags for families, for an example, with with the availability of the fuel, we'll call it, right? All of the fuel that's available for these folks. I guess where my question is going is, what if Ted Bundy had access to the fuel available today? What are the potentials there, and what do you see in your research and your interviews with these individuals? And I'll start with you, Dr. Simon. where are they gaining the most access in terms of through their fantasy process? And by the way, if you're just joining us, folks, this is an amazing panel. If you can't tell already, this is a very sensitive subject. So if it's a little heavy for you, come back later and watch the rerun. But I just want to give you a heads up. So, Doc Simon, did you get where I was going there?
Yeah, and I wouldn't have anything to add with regards to what Ann and Gary were talking about the assessing the pornography, and that's exactly words out of my mouth on that. But as far as the question, you're looking for what is it again, Chris? What are you?
Yeah, what kind of red flags, right? For the average woman who may just get into gaming, and next thing you know, she's on the metaverse and she enters, a world of. I read one quick article that talked about one victim. She was in the metaverse for 30 seconds, and she immediately had 5 or 6 avatars groping her and trying to pull her into other rooms. So what kind of tools can we give this woman, if she's into gaming and she happens to be in these environments? What say you if you have your thought there?
Well, and I mean, obviously to get out, whatever it is that, to leave the situation, and maybe, of course, go a different route, a different game, or what have you. Not to subject anyone. No one wants to be subjected to that, and nor should they be. And that's, again, going back to, that's part of the disturbing factors that you have folks that and I would say most that want to go on there, want to enjoy the experience and not be subjected to any aspect of sexual violence or any kind of violence for that matter. And I believe you asked me did you mention about Bundy? Did you mention about now he did have access to pornography. So right. Now putting him in, just having him start off with the metaverse. Yeah. I actually, going back to Dean, what he said, I think that the metaverse would have given someone like Bundy the opportunity to rehearse. Okay, whereas opposed to, because Bundy engaged in other types of criminality for what some would arguably would say was rehearsal. For example, hitting a young woman with a stick and running away just to observe their reaction, or telling jokes in front of women just to see what their reactions would be. So essentially, he's studying his victims in real time. So if you have the metaverse, he could go on there and he could study his victims with that I'm going to tell you, I got to work on pronouncing that anonymous. Help me out, guys. Anonymity. There you go. Anonymous. Yeah,
right. Yeah, I'm with you. You should see me drive. Well, actually, you've seen me drive, so that's kind of a scary thought in of itself. But yeah.
Yeah. So, and the other thing too is, I mean, if you have small children, okay, and it's kind of relates to what you're saying about warning signs and perhaps, and one of the things, small kids accidentally, for example, may pick up an animal accidentally and ever so slightly injure it, which they're not meaning to do that. Okay, so essentially, what a parent should do is they should go and teach the child, show the child on how to pick up the animal so the animal is not injured. Okay, so this goes back to parenting. Okay, this goes back to recognition, parenting, and if you go in the other room 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times and you still hear the animal being injured after you have showed, okay, what to do. These may be some of the things. And again, I'm sharing that as a, maybe for an example. You want to observe your child. You want to make sure that you're supervising your child, or, with these things and directing them. I mean, if a child, let's say if a kid's allowed to play a video game 2 or 3 hours a day, and then they find themselves playing 14 hours a day or 15 hours a day, that's an issue. So,
Which
you come in
all the time.
huh?
It's
But,
happening all the time with kids. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we go back to that exposure. That means that child is being exposed 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times more than someone else. So it goes back to the number of exposures. And so again, I mean, all these things, and you have to have the individuals at play as well. But, again, these are things that we could, certainly watch for. I gave the example of the animal because I remember my daughter accidentally, she was 4 at the time, and I had gotten her, a new puppy, and I was in the other room and, accidentally, picking the dog up the wrong way. And so I went in the other room and I showed her, and again, you're supposed to show, not tell. You're supposed to show, demonstrate. So again, I go back and I'm watching TV or what have you, and then she's never made the mistake again. Sometimes kids, it may be 2 or 3 times maybe before they catch on. So again, that goes to, okay, you can play the video game 1 hour. Okay, maybe that 1 hour turns into 2 hours. Okay, well, then you got to direct again. You have to, okay, well, and maybe even explain why you don't want the individual playing this long, and where things could be ignored, like homework, chores, and other things, schooling, and such like that.
It's right. Greg, what were you going to say? I can tell you wanted to lean in here.
No, just to reemphasize we talk about how practice makes perfect. Well, it's not really practice that makes perfect. It's perfect practice makes perfect. And this is a beautiful example of a forum that can allow for creating that perfect practice before going out to offend. But let me ask you, Chris, I mean, as an individual that's investigated over 300 homicides, you can share with us any example of cases that you've had where in any number of those instances when an individual had access to this potential, how that would have affected your job as an investigator, how it would have influenced your ability to solve that crime.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and I am very concerned about what's on the horizon, right? And just knowing what was before. I mean, we were part of that early on, when the internet showed up, right? 93, 95. And everybody went, what's the internet? And remember, you have to type in DOS back in the day.
Yeah.
And so this is like the internet. I don't think this is anything that, and I'm grateful the 3 docs are here because, this is their lane in yourself, where I think we're in new territory here that is, because it's going to hit the school systems. We're going to have kids in school, going through virtual learning. And then what does that expose them to in relationship to their victimology? How does that, fall into play for the Wesley Dodds of the world, right? Docs. I mean, and, how does that play into his play? And that's what is really concerning for me. So from an investigative aspect, I think we're going to have to learn what exactly, is going to be the behavioral type, what kind of personality is going to present itself in these worlds, and kind of listen to the victims, unfortunately, to kind of get a baseline on where this stuff is going to go. So I think it's going to be an interesting next 10, 15 years, which, you know, I started reading, and then and Dr. Burgess, your thoughts on this. When I saw the first article that said, you know, I walked into this room, you know, anticipating a party, and boom, she was attacked. Her avatar was attacked. And I thought, holy cow, you know, what are we going to do with this? Because to your point, Greg, earlier, is if they have these environments, right? How are they going to play it to their advantage? So, Doc Burgess, starting your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that there's going to have to be I think we've got to find out where this is going. It's going to, I'm sure, hit the young people. And if it's going to be like the internet, where the parents and older people were the last ones to get on board, it was the young people that's really took over with the internet. I wonder if that's going to be the same way with this.
Interesting.
So, yeah, we need to really have, I think, a better handle on who's doing this. Do they have to have the headgear to do this? I mean, will that be that? If that's so, that makes it a little bit easier because people could see the headgear. Does anyone know the answer to that?
Yeah, you have to have the virtual goggles, right. And then they have these paddles.
Yeah, so at least parents would know that. I mean, because they'll have the headgear, right? So we need to get more information, I think, from the people that are going into these rooms and finding out, like you said, I think there are a couple of other cases that were like that I tried to look at today. So it is coming around. We need to probably keep better tabs on that and get the information out.
Okay.
I think Greg was going to say something.
Greg, did you want, or Dean?
No. Okay. Sorry.
Dean, what do you say?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to ask Greg maybe his thought about this, because we're really contrasting the physical world that we all live in versus this metaverse, right? I mean, it's a parallel, or it's out there. It's a different universe, as it were. In the, you know, within the physical world, when we talk about people, one of the things we train on, Greg, is the 3 questions with situational awareness and all of that. I guess my thought is that maybe at least a place to start. And maybe you can address kind of how that approach in the physical world, how we teach people to do situational awareness, but could those be applicable for someone who finds himself in the metaverse, at least as a starting point?
You mean using it in a more legitimate fashion?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, the questions that we teach people to ask themselves in the physical world, they should be asking those same questions, I would think, in a metaverse, right?
Sure.
Aren't they all applicable?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I do know that the prices come way down on those headsets, so that they're much more affordable for people. So that's a point to be concerned about. I know I'm going to ask my students next week how many have actually, tried any of the, are in any way involved in the metaverse. To start using the language. And Greg, I'm sorry, I think I cut into you.
Go ahead, Greg. Thoughts?
No, not at all. I think there are ways that certainly law enforcement can utilize this as a tool in crime prevention, for example, right? And we can use it in very legitimate ways. With respect to victimology, you know, we tried to teach for the civilian side of the house that there are basically three questions one can ask themselves to make a determination as to their potential risk level in a situation, environment, or circumstances. And that is, what am I doing? Who am I with? And where am I? And to the degree that my questions, or rather my answers to those questions, keep me in low risk, kind of a category on a continuum, low, medium, high risk. If I can maintain a low risk status, then the chances, the probabilities of becoming a victim to a particular violent crime, or even an accident for that matter, it just depends on what the activity is that's being involved. That my answers can help me gauge that. And certainly we can utilize this tool in various scenarios that could be very helpful to the general civilian population, engaging victimology risk levels. You know, what are my potential? What's my potential of being a victim of this particular type of crime within this scenario? Here's a scenario. Here's a situation and environment. This is what's going on. And suddenly, you know, you introduce now into that environmental aspect something that increases the risk level. Or how are you going to handle that? What are you going to do? What are your options? And so it can be very, very effective, I think.
So I have a question that just popped into my mind. Do we have a fourth life here? So we have public, private, secret, and now do we have virtual?
Yeah, it does allow us to
Right.
live out a secret life,
Well,
and a private life in virtual reality.
yeah, but is this another dimension? Is this a higher dimension to just the secret life? I mean, right? I mean, I'm curious. What's everybody think of that thought?
Well, I think to me what's fascinating is that people oftentimes will go onto the internet with these avatars and create personalities and things that they wish they were, rather than it being a total mirror of themselves. It's their fantasy of what they can be. So whether it be how the avatar looks or what it does. I mean, you see that with some of these kids in the gaming areas. So, you know, I think there is might be a fourth avenue there. The other question I have on this that is interesting is, I wonder if there's some kind of a kill switch on this, because the difference that I would see between somebody let's say we take somebody who gets themselves at a party, going back to your example, Chris, somebody finds himself at a party and the next thing they know, the guy's trying to pull them into a side room you're there, you're stuck, you know, there's so many variables there. And I think I read the same article that you were talking about, that this person was pulled into this side room and sexually assaulted and all of that dynamic. And I think the first thing that struck me was, well, can't you just shut it off? Can't you just leave that? Can't you push off and go away from that? And that for me raises some interesting questions, because if you can't, then you should be able to, one. And if you can, but you're not, then the docs are going to have to help me understand all of that as to why somebody who has the option to shut it off and immediately escape the room is staying engaged. So,
Anne, what do you think?
Well, I was going to ask even another question. Is there anything built into the software that would stop something? I mean, that's a question for the engineers, I guess. But I am reminded of a very famous case out of New York and this was back in the days when when young people were doing, forget which platform it was, but they were told they should never meet. It's okay to talk on the chat room or whatever it was, but you're never supposed to meet. And in this case, they did meet. And of course, the young man happened to be a sadist and did incredible. Some of you may remember that case. It was a big case that went to court. And then they got into, after he was convicted, they appealed it on the basis of the rape shield law. Billy might remember that or help us with the legal matter. And what the prosecutor decided was not to recharge it again. But I was always reminded that you can't have these rules, especially if young people are going to override them, and you know that they can. So to get back to Dean is saying, you know, you can have people victims so scared that they wouldn't necessarily know how to push the button to stop or whatever you had in there, because the whole basis of some of the offenders is to really scare and to put fear in and to threaten. So I think that's where some of the early, if there's going to be any kind of charges made, it's going to be in that area of frightening people. And even if they don't do anything legally, look at what it does psychologically to the person. So,
Yeah, very interesting.
So to your point, Dr. Burgess, there are platforms that are created where the people who get into those rooms can't get closer than 3 feet from anybody else. So they can create the software to prevent this from happening. And I think the first step is going to be civil lawsuits, right?
yes.
So if somebody is psychologically damaged, well, you can sue not just the person that did the psychological damage, but you can sue the platform. It's a little bit like asbestos breaks, right? Do you have an option to make a break that's not asbestos? Well, yes, I do. Well, why didn't you do it, right? So it's the same thing. Did you have an option to create a platform where you didn't allow people to rape each other? And if you had that option and you failed to do it, then you failed to follow a standard of care for these people that enter your system. I don't know.
You know, one of the things that I think should be some consideration as we discuss this is, you know, will this world be utilized obviously as a tool of advantage for the offender? I think we can all agree that, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But they create these online virtual relationships that are, you know, solidified in, you know, kindness and, you know, all of the chameleon behaviors that will take place. And then it turns even into, you know, an intimate relationship virtually. But then at some point they're going to meet, kind of like the apps, you know, with Tinder, you know, and all the things that, you know, those folks do that utilize that, you know, those are tools. I'm really going to be interested in what the research is going to show, that individuals who utilize the metaverse to play, you know, the good guy, i.e. Ted Bundy with the cast. And next thing you know it, you know, is this just another cast that, you know, is a potential? What do you think, Dr. Brucato, up there in the right corner?
Well, what I find myself thinking about as we're having this discussion is that I think we do have a tendency to overestimate the brain's ability to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. And I was thinking about how some years ago I went to, you know, without giving the name, I went to an amusement park that had a virtual reality ride. And it was something like, I don't remember, flying through history and being attacked by T-Rexes and things like that. And I remember that when the ride was over, somebody behind me on the line touched my shoulder to ask me to turn around to comment on the ride. And I had a startle reaction. I jumped. And I remember having my heartbeat higher and so forth. So in other words, it was very clear to me that my brain had absolutely no idea that this was not really happening. So that I understand intellectually that it's fantasy, but I'm having all the same biological reactions. And so to me, the concern is that people are going to react to all of this by saying, oh, come on. I mean, I know this is just a fantasy and so forth. But I think that all of the physiological reactions are happening just as if it's real life right under our noses, and gradually desensitizing people or heightening their arousal. So that's I find that very concerning. And I wonder if other people have the same thought, that there's probably no difference to the brain.
What about the chameleon aspect from the offender's position?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously, I was thinking about that too. I mean, I think that it's let's put it this way. I think that individuals who can hide behind an avatar and who have a rich fantasy life and who are predatory are going to take very great advantage of that. I also find it concerning, you know, in the following way. I think that, you know, when you've interviewed offenders, particularly serial killers, one of the things that comes up often is the way that they prowl and hunt for victims. You know, in some of them, you know, we have the idea that they go out and kill repeatedly and they're all different people. But I have found that for some of them, it's really as if they're killing one person over and over and over again until the fantasy is perfected, so that they go out like almost like a director that's casting a film, and they have to find someone who fits the part, and sometimes they even change the victim, change their hair, change their clothing, so forth, to fit that part, with the idea being that they need the fantasy to be as perfect as possible. And what worries me also is that when you're living in a world of avatars where people don't really have faces, anyone could be the fantasy victim. So that there's not only the anonymity of the offender, but the idea that the victim could be anything you imagine them to be, which exponentially increases the victim pool. And so that, that's the other piece of this I find concerning. And again, I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on whether that's a realistic concern.
Yeah, everybody else weigh in if you have a thought. I think that's fair.
I agree with that, Gary.
Yep.
And imagine this as well. It can go to the reverse as well. You can open up the pool, but you can also become much more selective and targeted. You identify an individual and you can put a face on that individual, and you practice that over and over again. And eventually one may argue, well, look at, if you stick just to the metaverse and you may not ever commit that crime. Well, it's been my experience when dealing with these individuals and talking to them about their crimes, the more they fantasize about it, the more real it becomes and the more frustrating it becomes, because it's less and less satisfying to them. And eventually they have to go out and commit it. So now they put a face to the individual before, in practicing committing that crime against that individual. So just as it can open it up to many, you can also become much more selective in your target.
Right. And I think, kind of the elephant in the room as we're talking about all this is the fact that we think of serial sexual homicide, which of course is the most common form of serial killing, as being something that's been there since the dawn of man. And it probably was. But you could count on a couple of hands the number of cases of it prior to, around the middle of the last century. And you start asking yourself, why was there such an explosion of this from the 1960s, especially to the 1990s? And you start thinking about the interplay of culture and the interplay of technology. I have no doubt that in centuries past, people who were perverse in this way drew pictures or had to imagine very intensely and so forth. And then gradually, as technology advanced, it became easier and easier and easier to not only get victims and acquire people of a certain type that excited an individual, but also then to play out these fantasies, break down the breaking system of the brain, and then spill over into real life. But I think there is no question that with every technology, we increase the pool of potential victims, and we increase the degree to which the brain is being hurled into this soup of being stimulated as if these things are real, and the breakdown of the breaking system of the brain. So that it would be very interesting to see, the ratio of if we're starting to see an increase in serial sexual homicide with this new pool and new technology being increased. But it does seem to increase exponentially with every decade as time goes on. And I think that's partly because of the breakdown of social mores and our particular personalities to become more brittle and more self-absorbed, more audacious, less sanctions on things in the culture, but then also the technology piece.
Yeah.
Good.
I find it interesting along that same thought is, years ago, 1800s, for example, you've got the literature. Literature was the medium of transferring ideas. And as we take a look at some of what we call horror or Gothic type of literature, Dracula,
right?
It is Halloween.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, Dracula. The Portrait of Dorian Gray is an excellent study of what happens through this mental process and what people will engage in as a fantasy. And as we take a look at those types of things, these concepts have been around. Where did they come up with them? Did they come up with those authors, come up with those ideas just out of the cuff, or did they read about some cases did they hear about cases? These thoughts about the werewolf and Dracula. These folks have been around a long time. And I think these cases have been around a long time because it's human beings that commit these crimes. And somebody has to look at them. Somebody has to clean them up. And somebody discovers them. So it seems to be at one level, certainly in the heart of human beings. And we see it acted out in many variations of media, even dating back to, and before that, of course, but the 1800s in the literature, as we see of those particular books.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So so we've got about 15 minutes here, or 10 minutes. I don't want to keep you too long. But so the first question I want to ask is, I just think this has been or more of a comment. It's been a fascinating discussion so far, and I think there's a lot more. So I'm going to invite you all back at some point, and I think we need to really go a little bit deeper here as we go along. But I have some questions that have arisen, so I'm just going to put a couple of them up, and one of them is obviously going to be a lawyer question. That's really is the one that came to the top, Billy. Sorry to break it to you, but here it is here. Ickney asks, Enix asks, I wonder how defense lawyers can use this to their advantage. Well, I wonder, Billy. Tell us.
Well, it depends on the crime, right? Right now, an avatar raping another avatar is not a crime. You can sue them civilly for, emotional damage, but yeah, there's a lot of easy picking when it comes to once they do start to make statutes that make this illegal. One is overbreadth. Is the law so broad that it affects not just what you're doing, but some legally protected actions? So, and that's kind of the challenge that's already been brought up to that Protect Act of 2003 that I talked about. And not just defense lawyers, but prosecutors are afraid of those constitutional challenges too. So what they do in some of the cases is, rather than risk having the law overturned or having a conviction overturned, is give them a better plea offer. So you may find a sex offender who gets only 6 months instead of 20 years, right? Because the prosecutor is afraid, well, gosh, this law can easily be challenged. And so the punishment can be less, right, for some of those people. But there's, depending on what the crime would be, yeah, there's a lot of easy picking for even defense lawyers who aren't that experienced or knowledgeable. It's going to be wide open.
Thank you. So the next, Janet asked, and this is an open, whoever wants to take it, says, do you think this metaverse fantasy land is creating or enabling more criminal offenders or a new level of criminality? Whoever wants to take that one.
Yes.
Right.
I'd say yes on all three counts. Absolutely. I mean, it further ignites fantasy. It gives them an opportunity to act it out, and it will create another potential offender that's going to enhance their skills as a result of it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. Certainly the extreme, it's pushing to the extreme levels. If that might be a new level, I don't know, but I would agree with Greg.
Yeah, and if you folks have some, go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to one of the questions we asked earlier. Do you have to have a predisposition for this stuff to have an effect on you? So, for example, when child pornography cases are prosecuted, the police have to see the child pornography, the prosecutors have to see the child pornography, and the defense lawyers have to see it, right? But just by viewing the child pornography doesn't create a bunch of child molesters who already didn't have a predisposition for it. So you don't see a rash of prosecutors, police, and defense lawyers becoming child molesters because they had the unfortunate case of a child porn case, right? It just, if you don't have, it seems to me, and the doctors will have to answer this, if you don't have some tendency or some predisposition, you're not going to be susceptible to this stuff. Doctors?
Yes, yes, I think that's been shown. I don't know that Gary has any data on that, but certainly the propensity to become, it's like the example of detective magazines. You could show them to 20 people, and this one particular person was really able to, that was his pornography, if you will, and didn't bother, detective magazine covers didn't bother anybody else.
And I think it's very easy to underestimate how critical the point is that in people who commit serial sexual homicide, the fantasy life really begins early on. There tend to be very clear themes of domination, control, manipulation against individuals that have, harmed the individual or rejected the individual. And there is a vivid need to play out those fantasies in an increasingly exciting way, whether it's actually mutilating animals, whether it's sitting and engaging in pleasuring the self while envisioning these things, drawing pictures, cutting people out of catalogs and drawing restraints on them like the BTK killer did, etc. and so on, pornography. So that this just adds to the pile of ways in which one might stimulate oneself visually in this fantasy process. But I think that point, which, there are people here who help to elucidate that very basic point in the literature, that fantasy is key in these individuals, I think are understandably highly concerned.
Interesting.
Can I ask Dr. Simon a question about something I know he's talked about at trainings, and that is is there a linkage between actual assaults and people who are participating with some of the robotic stuff that's available now and some of the broad, have they made any linkage between that?
Well, I know the question's been posed before about would somebody that is engaging in assault with these robotics or even the lifelike silicone dolls or blow-up dolls, and the answer, in of course my mind, and want to hear if someone else had the similar view as well, but I do believe that it would make matters worse. I don't think that so for example, if someone showed me, and I can't remember where the article came from or if it was an advertisement, I can't remember, but if you assault this doll, it'll decrease the propensity for someone to do this to some real human being in real life, but that's just not true. I think it would have the opposite effect.
Yeah, and which leads to this really good question here, where people are watching this in the metaverse, but they're not doing anything, so they're subject to almost a voyeurism role. How is that going to impact, real life society, right? Because we saw that early on when the internet came out, right? We all knew who the trench coat guy was, but we didn't know who that other creepy guy was, for lack of a better analogy. And then that person started to reveal themselves, because they were stuck watching all the chat rooms and all of that charged material, that fuel coming, and they had to, expel that fuel at some point. And I see there's a buddy of mine, Larry Avich, he's in the chat here. He was part of the San Diego County Homicide Task Force back in the day. That we had 43 women that were, put into the mountains. I wasn't part of the task force at the time, but he was. But I had done some interviews with some folks, part of that. And at the time we were listening to what the ladies of the evening were telling us about how the Johns had become much more violent. And we were able to do a correlation to, the connecting it to the voyeurism role within the chat rooms where they couldn't compete for the victimology, of a different victim. So I think this is that on steroids, where, these young victims, unfortunately, are going to be lured into these safety zones that they think through the chameleon aspect of this. And then there's going to be a whole new genre of individuals watching. And at some point, right? I mean, docs, is it the same analogy that it has to be expelled at some point? What do you think? Dr. Burgess, I think you're muted just real fast. So, that's okay.
Yes, I think that's really, really important of the voyeuristic aspect. And it gets into, they've done all kinds of research on bystander intervention, even in real situations, and find that people will not necessarily intervene if they think somebody else is going to do it. So they're always saying, oh, somebody else will stop it. So that seems to be a human phenomenon that is there. But I think that the other aspect is equally important. That the luring of the naive person in is such a danger. That case that I have with a 14-year-old, she loved dancing and she thought he was interested in her dancing. Well, more than that.
Interesting.
So,
Greg, what are your thoughts? Just kind of dovetail into that idea.
Well, I just certainly agree with it. I just think that we're entering into a new technology that has the capacity and potential for great things. And as in every piece of technology we've ever had, can also be used for evil. And this is going to expand and exploit all the good and expand it into this other dark category. And I think that law enforcement's got some real challenges ahead of them, as well as mental health people.
Yeah, that was the next question here from Polka Dot. She said, since criminals have the ability to practice in the metaverse, when they offend, will their crime potentially be more difficult to solve? And I think collectively we kind of all agree that, yeah, it's going to be a new territory, right? I can't wait to hear some of your guys research that and read it, and just how you're going to connect some of these dots, to protect what you have always been doing in your careers and teaching and your education to the public, and to really, really make a difference. I think we're in fresh new territory. I certainly look forward. Billy, go ahead. Thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think that person made a good point, but could you imagine how easy a conviction would be if somebody gets caught or accused of rape? You go back into their computer and they've been rehearsing these rape scenarios. I mean, it'd be a great tool for investigators to go back and grab that, and then take about 10 minutes to get a verdict on that.
Dr. Gary?
Well, I would just add for people like, Ann and myself, we work together at Boston College on research. It's unfortunate that the data will arise with these inevitable cases of abusing the metaverse. But I do think that the electronic footprints that are left by these offenders will allow us to understand how people rehearse to commit these offenses in a way that currently is not available, because we're kind of going on the recollections of offenders. We don't even know if they're telling the truth. We don't know to which degree they're amusing themselves, shaping the story, or lying. But the fact is that here there'll be an unalterable record. And we'll be able to see, what is the amount of time between having these fantasies and going out and committing these offenses? What are the words and phrases that are used to lure a victim? How is the confidence built over time? How does one represent oneself? So I think, I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts, but I think that's going to become very important from a research perspective.
Fascinating. Let's do this. So a couple of final words, and then if you would just add your own thought process in relationship to a safety tip that may have come to your mind as you give us your final thoughts, and then we'll circle back and hopefully we can reassemble this panel again and go a little bit deeper into as things go along. And by the way, if you've just joined us, everybody on this panel, their bio is in the description below on this channel. You'll be able to click in there and go buy their books. I know everybody has a book here. So I will go find that book, and I'll make sure that that is also in the links. These individuals, as you know, these fine doctors, as well as Greg, Billy, Dean, are just amazing human beings, and they have protected thousands and tens of thousands of people in the reality of the metaverse before it ever existed. They've always been behind the scenes in many ways, and I know as an investigator for many years the impact that they've had on my life to help me put these individuals into the jails and the prisons where they unfortunately belong. And but going forward, Dr. Simon, we're going to start with you in the upper left-hand corner because I absolutely love you, man. You are hysterical. I don't think people understand the other side of your personality because we're all so serious here. Okay, but
well, you know, I mean, you took the
dog. Where's your dog? Where's your dog?
Right over here. Well, come on, you know he's always by my side. Check it out. Come on.
There he is.
You see, now I didn't want to scare anybody because I mean, it was like I said, I usually say he's a Rottweiler or a pit bull. So, no, but I was gonna say the same thing, Chris. I mean, I love you to death. Love what you do, and thanks as always is having me on. But I got to tell you, I mean, we talk about the metaverse. I remember someone told me long ago that bottled water would be a $1 billion business, and when I would chuckle, and when I heard those those statistics, that slideshow that you showed, it's mind blowing. And of course, dovetailing on what Greg was saying, everyone was saying really about the how investigations and things. I mean, it's certainly it's mind blowing to me to look at what the future holds. Right off the bat, I mean, my just a suggestion. I know it sounds cliche, but love your child. And what essentially I mean by that is that, show your child recognition, take him or her, engage in activities, together, as much as you can. And I know that today is the video gamer world, and I know that's where we're at today. And I mean, a lot of times we may not have time. I remember just last week, I took my little one to a haunted house. So, but of course, when we got back from the haunted house, she was, on the YouTube. So, but at least that I was able to intercede a little bit to decrease that time frame. So it goes back to recognizing again your child, showing attention, engaging in different activities, and that could help. That certainly could, because when I hear of a young one playing, engaging in these activities for a long period of time, I do think to myself, well, what else is there? Is there sports? Is there something that else you can do to occupy the time? Being aware. So, but again, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Dr. Burgess, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are, first of all, I'm impressed that we have a multidisciplinary group here. And I think this is really the way we should do more work together, because law enforcement has certain things to think about in respect to this matter, and certainly nursing in my field does in terms of victims and so forth, and psychology, Gary's, where all of that, I think, is a plus for looking at this problem. It's here. If we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, because that's the internet. It just keeps going. So I say for that. The other factor, I want to get the right questions to ask. I want to work on that, make sure people who see victims and offenders are asking questions about the metaverse. I'm going to find out from my students how many have used it, or how are they using it, and then see if we can develop the risk factors, because it's going after the vulnerable victims that can be targeted by offenders that seem savvy in this. And I think that's the other question, is how many of offenders or potential offenders are using Metaverse. So those are just some of the questions that I appreciate having this opportunity to see if I can put them into practice, so to speak, after this. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your being here, most definitely. Dr. Brucato, sir.
Well, first of all, this has been a wonderful opportunity. I echo everything that everyone else is saying about the importance of research going forward, and I love the thoughts that Lawrence was bringing up about being good to your children and educating them. I find myself thinking throughout this conversation that if the dream here of the people developing the metaverse is to create a kind of a world, right now that world is the Wild West. It's kind of lawless. And I think that with the responsibility of creating that world, we have to realistically think about behavior in that world, how to block inappropriate behaviors, and so forth. For example, a sex offender who is on a registry doesn't have to be identified as such in this meta world. But why not? If this is going to be a real world, then people should know that there's a dangerous person living in the virtual world next door, the virtual house next door, right? So that kind of labeling of individuals who are at risk is very important, and and so forth. So I think that's just one tiny example of what I mean. But I think a whole new world is opening up. It's almost like we're founding a new country where we've got to come up with the laws of it, and we can't just allow it to be the Wild West.
Fascinating comment and insight. Very well. Interesting. Very interesting. Dean, we're going to come over to you, and then we're going to give Greg the last word. We're going to go next to Billy.
Well, it's been a privilege, and I have such high respect for everybody on this panel. You guys are just amazing, and my life is totally blessed to have the opportunity to be able to work with all of you. And so I really appreciate that. I guess my closing thought, maybe for moms, dads, and people maybe who are watching us to think about is that don't ever underestimate the power and the need for boundaries. And I think boundaries are something that need to be established early on, and they need to be protected. And children at the earliest possible age need to be taught to say no and mean it and feel they're empowered to say no. And I think the final thing is to remember that familiarity and anonymity erode boundaries. And so you want to make sure that you're constantly reassessing and readjusting. And I had an opportunity yesterday to train with a group of people, and we were utilizing life flight to train our cadaver dogs to be deployed. And every time they landed that helicopter and shut the engine off, the pilot got out, walked all the way around, checked everything. When he started it back up, he went through a checklist to start it back up and went through that process. And I watched him do it multiple times throughout the day. And I think what happens to us is we start just living life and we forget our boundaries, our parameters, and we begin to drift. And that's one of the quickest ways we can get ourselves in trouble.
Yeah, very, very well said, buddy. Very well said. Appreciate you very much. Billy?
Yeah, I've got a challenge for the people who are watching. So what would you like to see as legislation? What rules would you like to see? What issues do you want to address? What are the problems? What is the harm? And what law would you like to see? And if you have draft, if we can come up with some draft legislation, we can push that to the lawmakers, no problem. But I would challenge the people who are watching this who believe this is a real problem or even a potential problem. Send some suggestions. Let's start drafting some legislation. Let's not do what we did in the past, which is wait another 10 or 15 years before we address the problem. Let's get ahead of it this time.
Fascinating. It never ends. I love you, man. Greg. Okay. When Greg is done, everybody knows I have a tradition. We go to Hawaii and we end on a positive note. Okay. I have a little song that we go to Hawaii. So when Greg is done, everybody on the panel, you'll see that I'll just go to another screen and the song Hawaii plays. So before Greg finishes up with us, I just want to tell everybody tonight again what an honor it is to have each and every one of you here this evening as our guest and this amazing panel of experts. But you, the subscribers and the members of this channel, you make the difference to each and every one of us. Because it's not only your insight to share this information out with all your friends and family, but it also helps support all the research that's taking place with each and every one of these doctors here. They can't tell you where they're always at, especially the guy in the upper left-hand corner, because I know where he is, but he can't tell you where he's at. But he's out there doing it as is Dr. Burgess, as is Dr. Brucato, as is Greg. I can tell you where Greg is. He's in Kansas, teaching, and so I can dime him off, but I can't dime off everybody else. But we just want you to know how grateful we are from the Cold Case Foundation's perspective of how much support you give us as an organization, a nonprofit organization, to make a difference in empowering and helping not only families, but survivors out there and families who are suffering without the resources to get things done. So if you find it in your heart, continue to go over to the Cold Case Foundation. We are a nonprofit 501c3. If you can continue to support that organization, it goes to helping those families in need. And Dean gave a perfect example of dropping in on a helicopter yesterday to train cadaver dogs. Those dogs are provided to law enforcement agencies and families around the United States and North America, and even overseas if necessary, free of charge because of your support. And it also allows this great panel here to lecture and to help as necessary and train wherever we can make a difference. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg for the final word. And then everybody, again, please hit that like button, that thumbs up, subscribe. And I had to learn all of this, guys, by the way, when we started this YouTube channel. But please hit those, buttons and please pass it on. For that, we would be always grateful. Greg, you have the final word, brother.
Well, thanks, Chris. First of all, let me say thank you to everybody that's participated tonight, and Chris for organizing this. And I want the audience to know these are the type of people that we associate within the Cold Case Foundation. They are all members and members of our experts on the Cold Case Foundation and our resources for law enforcement agencies and victims' families at no cost to either. And their hearts and their heads are in the right place. And we have found a collaboration within the organization to provide some very significant assistance and resources to law enforcement agencies throughout the world. And not because of money that they make, because they don't make money on the cases that we work. They offer their heart and their knowledge. And you just don't find that enough in today's world. But this is one organization that helps facilitate that. So thank you to each one of you. How fortunate we are to have this collaboration with one another. And even more so, how fortunate law enforcement is and victims' families are that it's available to them. Just add one last thing, and that is for everybody to question what you see, what you're doing, and where you are. To recognize that we, innocently or ignorantly, recklessly or negligently, do and can contribute to our own victimization in various forms. And as we look at cases over the years, thousands and thousands of cases, innocently and ignorantly, as I've mentioned, but also recklessly and negligently, we do contribute to victimization, our own victimization, through choices that we make and behaviors that we engage in. That's not to say that there are not absolute innocent victims out there, meaning that they had nothing to do with becoming a victim. That's absolutely true. And even saying that, it's important to realize even those that may engage in behaviors that will elevate their risk level, you have a right to do that. You have a right to engage in that behavior. You have the civil rights to do that. But unfortunately, when we do those things, law enforcement is left with the responsibility of assessing and analyzing those contributing factors and trying to identify who is responsible for it. And what we're really about, as much as trying to solve cases, is trying to prevent them. So from the things that we learn in those cases that we look at, we're trying to identify those characteristics about the case that can help the population at large, if you will, to identify those things that contribute to victimization and what we can do to prevent that from happening in our own lives. So question and learn, apply, and then take action. Thanks again, Chris.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.